After seeing a cracked egg, a woman decided to look into it. When she saw what was inside, she made the decision to retain it. Welcome to USA Stories channel. Do not forget to subscribe and activate the bell button to receive all new updates. Now let's go to the story. Susan Hickman liked taking walks. Susan, like a lot of other individuals, believed that walking was the ideal way to unwind or decompress. One morning, Susan was going on one of her routine walks when she happened to notice something unusual on the ground. Something looked like an egg. It had immediately occurred to her that this egg belonged to a bird. The thing was by itself, Susan noted. The absence of any birds in the vicinity was even more concerning. But there was nobody else in the area but Susan and the egg. Yusan knelt to retrieve it. The egg was small. It measured no more than a couple inches. But its size wasn't what caught people's attention the most. Susan discovered that the egg's shell had some damage as soon as she picked it up. The egg's shell cracked severely, indicating that it had dropped from a great height. With the shattered object in her hands, Susan glanced up at the trees, but she was unable to spot the nest. She raised the egg to her face and cast a backward glance at it. Susan saw the fracture. A small amount of the cracked shell had caved in, revealing something inside. She tilted the egg just a little bit and looked into it. Susan became aware of movement coming from inside at this precise time. Susan noticed something that the typical person could have missed since it was so subtle. Within the egg was an actual living chick. Susan felt calmer. Despite all that may have happened to the lone animal, it was fortunate enough to have lived. She was already cautious while handling the egg, but this additional information increased her vigilance. Susan was eager to see what would happen next as the small chick started to wiggle a little more. The egg shattered even more suddenly, revealing the birth of a chick. The strange-looking young bird was hatching right in front of her. Susan found it hard to believe. She marveled at the little creature's ability to break out from its shell as she watched. It chirped as it shifted about in Susan's cozy hand. She never would have thought that she would see something so unusual. After the moment of awe faded, Susan started to feel worried. The little bird has no mother, no one to mentor or encourage it. It couldn't help itself and was in a precarious situation. She realized she wouldn't be able to carry out her first impulse to release the newborn chick back into the wild, maybe even putting it in the nest from whence it had come. She had already taken a quick glance around and saw that no other birds were in the area. This implied that Susan would be dooming the unfortunate bird to a cruel end if she left it where she found it. Susan knew she had to bring the tiny bird into her life. There was no other option. The little bird would have Susan as a stand-in mother. It was she who discovered the bird's egg, and she could no longer ignore it. With her new friend curled up in her hands, Susan made her way back to her home. Susan tried to create an incubator for the small bird as soon as she got back to her house. Newborns frequently require warmth upon their arrival, and this particular chick was no exception. Taking care of a bird was something Susan had never done before. Not that she was a quitter, even if she'd never taken care of a bird before. Susan felt the burden of her duty and did her best to provide for the needs of the newborn bird. This included the essentials like food, drink, and housing. Susan made the decision to get in touch with friends or acquaintances who really had some birding expertise. While some of her acquaintances had experience with bird recovery, their advice to Susan was concerning. Susan quickly placed her phone down since she didn't like what her pals were telling her. It became revealed that young birds have more difficult lives, particularly if they are away from their nest or have been abandoned by their parents. In actuality, they had a very poor survival rate. Susan, however, was not going to accept this response. In Susan's position, how would you respond? Susan, as was already established, was not one to give up easily. This was particularly true of friendships and romantic connections. Even though she had only known the tiny bird for a short while, she already had feelings for it. A part of her knew what everyone was telling her, but a bigger part of her remained steadfastly loyal to the monster. When Susan checked on the fledgling the next day, she was relieved to discover that it was still alive. Now that she had the bird in her care, she considered naming it. Susan chose to call her new bird Klinger to reflect its fierce nature. Susan was more than prepared to take on the role of caregiver for the bird, but she would soon discover that birds are demanding creatures. The fact that chicks eat a lot is among their most startling traits. They actually require feedings around every 30 minutes. Susan said, "The baby was always hungry and never missed a meal." The bird would eventually grow given all this nutrition. Susan soon saw that the monster was becoming larger. What was even more thrilling was the glimpse of black feathers that were starting to show through Klinger's pink skin. Still, it remained a mystery what particular kind of bird he was. Susan would eventually be able to learn after a little while longer. Susan knew that many bird species had distinct needs. The primary issue with not knowing what sort of bird Klinger was not being able to customize for every unique demand. But Susan did her best to be the greatest mother she could be, and she found it to be a really fulfilling experience. She had never done anything like this before, and she knew that taking care of Klinger would always be a special place in her heart. Among the numerous significant occasions was Klinger's initial opening of his eyes. Klinger had not opened his eyes since he had just emerged from his egg, despite the fact that they had already spent several days together. When he did eventually lay eyes on Susan, it was not just any old human, but his adoptive mother. The bird's appearance has altered significantly after a year. Susan was delighted to find that the odd-looking small chick she had previously cradled in the palm of her hand had grown into a mature adult bird. Klinger had more than doubled in size since he had grown out all of his feathers. Susan was finally able to identify him for who he truly was after he had reached this point. Klinger turned out to be a starling. Klinger and Susan had developed a strong bond, and the bird shared this attachment. But their relationship went deeper than she had initially thought. Among the numerous creatures that imprint are birds. An animal that is imprinted creates a bond to the first item it sees after birth. Their mother, who is their natural caregiver, is often the focus of their attention. Klinger had taken a like to Susan in this instance. Susan had originally intended to release the bird back into the wild, where it originated, but her intentions were derailed when she learned about the consequences of imprinting. Klinger had no emotional attachment to Susan and was more closely related to people. Luckily for Susan, owning a starling as a pet was not only acceptable but also lawful. This implied that Susan could look after Klinger indefinitely. Klinger didn't appear to be bothered by this development. Susan had saved his life, so he was fortunate to be found by her, but he also enjoyed her unselfish affection at this point. There was not much more he could have asked for than to be secure and nourished. Susan made the decision to post her experience online in June 2015. She went to YouTube and made a video that went over everything that had happened in the previous year. Who would have thought that one egg would serve as the catalyst for Susan's crazy journey? Please remember to subscribe to our channel, give us a thumbs up, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our videos. If you enjoyed the tale, the next video that plays on your screen will probably move you too.